I never thought a single morning could erase 25 years of loyalty, but life has its own timing. And sometimes, it chooses the most important days to test you. I still remember the sound of the office clock striking 9:02 a.m., sharp, cold, too loud for a normal day. Maybe it was my nerves, or maybe some part of me already knew that the day would change everything. It was my 25th work anniversary, the one day I thought I'd finally be appreciated. But instead, I was standing in front of Ethan Hale, the CEO's son, watching him flip through my file like it meant nothing. Ethan wasn't like his father. His father shook hands firmly, looked people in the eye, and remembered names. Ethan, on the other hand, barely looked up from the tablet he carried everywhere, like it was his shield from the real world. I stood there quietly, holding myself together, waiting for him to say the words I had hoped to hear. Maybe congratulations. Maybe we appreciate your loyalty. Maybe just a simple thank you. But he didn't even notice the date on the file. Instead, he cleared his throat casually and said words that didn't match the morning at all. We're restructuring. Your role isn't needed anymore. Just like that. No pause. No emotion. No respect for the years I had given. I honestly thought he was joking. I even smiled for a second, waiting for him to say something else. But he just pushed the file toward me, his expression blank. My heart sank, so fast I felt dizzy. You can collect your things, he added, already tapping on his screen again. HR will finalize everything. I wanted to say something, anything, but my voice just broke inside me. There are moments in life when silence becomes heavier than any words you could speak. I realized in that moment that I had given more to this company than I had given to myself. I stood there with a strange mix of shock and heartbreak, unable to understand how a 25-year journey could be erased in less than 30 seconds. As I walked out of his office, I felt every memory rush past me. The late nights, the canceled vacations, the deadlines I met even when it meant skipping meals. I remembered how I had watched this company rise, how I had helped build pieces of it brick by brick. And yet, here I was, being dismissed like I had never mattered. But it wasn't anger that shook me the most. It was the timing. Why today? Why on the one day that symbolized my loyalty? Was it deliberate? Was it carelessness? Or did he actually think firing someone on their anniversary was perfectly normal? When I entered the hallway, a few coworkers looked at me with wide eyes. Some looked away quickly, pretending they hadn't seen. A few leaned in as if they wanted to ask what happened, but no one actually did. That's how corporate worlds work. Everyone is scared to stand too close to the person being pushed out. I headed to HR, trying to breathe normally. But even the HR manager looked uncomfortable when she saw the date on my records. She kept glancing up, almost apologetic, but she still pushed the papers forward because that's how things go when decisions come from above. I signed them quietly. By the time I collected my mug, my photos, and the small things that stayed on my desk for years, my hands were trembling. I tried to tell myself it was just a job. People lose jobs all the time. But this wasn't just a job. This was 25 years of my life. I walked out of the building slower than I ever had. The security guard, who had known me since my first day, looked shocked when he saw the box in my hands. "Sir, everything okay?" he asked softly. I forced a smile. "Just a long morning." I stepped outside into the sunlight, but it didn't feel warm anymore. The city felt louder, heavier, unfamiliar. I sat on the bench across the street and took a deep breath that didn't help at all. I kept thinking the same question over and over. How could someone fire me without even knowing what I've done for the company? But what I didn't know then was that the real storm was happening inside the building, behind the boardroom doors, while I was sitting outside, feeling like everything was ending. At around 11:20 a.m., I got a message from an old colleague. I heard what happened. Something big is going on upstairs. Investors seem furious. I stared at the text, confused. Furious? About what? I wasn't important enough for my firing to cause any uproar. My role was steady, but not high profile. I couldn't imagine investors, the backbone of the company, being upset over my exit. Then another message came. The board is asking questions. Real questions. About decisions Ethan made without checking data. I blinked at the screen. My heartbeat quickened. I knew that tone. That was the tone people used when something serious was unfolding. Investors were not known for raising their voices unless the root of the problem touched money, strategy, or reputation. But why were they discussing Ethan's decisions on the same morning he fired me? Then came a third message, this one from someone who never texted during meetings. You won't believe what's happening. 12 investors just walked out. Walked. Out. I sat up straight. 12. That wasn't normal. That wasn't a disagreement. That was rebellion. And all of it was happening within hours of Ethan firing me. My mind started racing. What had gone wrong? What information had surfaced? What mistake had been made? And more importantly, how was any of this connected to the moment he fired me at 9:02 a.m.? I looked back at the building, the glass windows reflecting nothing about the chaos inside. The place where I had given half my life suddenly felt like a stranger's house. But even as confusion twisted inside me, something else began to rise too. Something I hadn't felt in years. A mix of curiosity and instinct. The same instinct that had helped me solve problems before anyone else even spotted them. The instinct that had kept the company out of trouble more times than people realized. And for the first time since the morning began, I felt something shift inside me. Whatever was happening in that boardroom wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning. But as I stood up, ready to walk back toward the building, I had no idea that the truth waiting inside would turn everything upside down. And I definitely didn't know that my firing was just the first piece in a much bigger chain of events. A chain that was about to pull me right back into the center of the storm. Just not in the way anyone expected. I stood at the edge of the sidewalk, staring at the glass building I had walked into for 25 straight years. The same building that had pushed me out without hesitation only a few hours earlier. My box of belongings sat beside me on the bench, but I barely noticed it anymore. My mind kept going back to the messages. 12 investors walking out, board members raising questions, Ethan under pressure. Something wasn't adding up, and the timing felt too sharp, too close to what had happened to me. I wasn't planning to march back inside as some sort of hero. That wasn't who I was, and honestly, the humiliation from the morning still sat heavy on my chest. But a part of me, some stubborn corner of my mind, refused to believe all of this was coincidence. I had been there longer than most of the people sitting in that boardroom. I had watched patterns, learned behaviors, seen small mistakes grow into expensive problems. And I also knew one thing very well. Investors didn't walk out unless something serious was brewing underneath. The sun had climbed higher, warming the edges of my face, but the knot in my stomach didn't loosen. I picked up my phone again, as if more messages might appear and explain everything. But the screen stayed blank. The silence felt heavier now. I took a breath and picked up the box. My hands weren't shaking as much this time. Maybe that was a sign that the confusion was slowly transforming into something more focused. I walked toward the building, not sure what I was going to do once I reached the door, but knowing I couldn't just sit outside anymore. The security guard was still there. He blinked in surprise when he saw me coming back. "Sir, everything all right?" he asked again, more concerned this time. "I just need to check something," I said quietly. He hesitated, then nodded. The boardroom level is on lockdown. Big meetings still ongoing. That only confirmed what I already suspected. Whatever was happening inside wasn't normal. I didn't try to go upstairs. That wasn't my place anymore. Instead, I walked to a quiet corner of the lobby, set down my box and sat again. I didn't want to create a scene or cause trouble. I just needed to think. The lobby buzzed with whispers, employees texting each other, rumors trading faster than facts. A few people recognized me and looked away quickly, unsure how to act around someone who was technically no longer one of them. I leaned back, closing my eyes for a moment. Memories of the company rushed through me again. My first day, the old CEO shaking my hand, the team dinners, the deadlines, the trust. And then, more recently, the strange shift after Ethan stepped in. He didn't inherit his father's patience or instinct. He relied too much on numbers pulled from screens and reports handed to him at the last minute. He made changes without understanding the history behind them. And maybe he had made a decision wrong enough for investors to push back. I opened my eyes again when my phone buzzed. Another message popped up. They mentioned something about projections being off. Something major. Projections? That word sent a jolt through me. I had worked closely on financial projections for over 2 decades. Even after being moved around or overlooked, people still came to me when they needed the numbers to be accurate. And Ethan had a habit of dismissing warnings he didn't want to hear. Slowly, puzzle pieces started forming in my mind. 2 months ago, I had flagged a discrepancy in the quarterly numbers, a quiet red flag hidden under optimistic charts. It wasn't a disaster, but it needed adjusting. I emailed Ethan's team, highlighted it clearly, and even followed up in person. They brushed it off, saying they'd handle it. What if they didn't? What if Ethan presented those numbers to the board without checking? What if investors had relied on that same overpolished projection? Another message arrived. Did you ever work on the revenue forecast from Q3? There's a huge argument about it right now. I stared at the message, my pulse quickening. Yes, I had worked on it. I remembered the day, clearly, the confusion, the rushed corrections, the ignored warnings. If that was the projection Ethan had used without updating it, then the entire plan for the next fiscal year could collapse. Investors would definitely walk out. The board would question everything. And suddenly, my firing felt less personal and more strategic. Had Ethan panicked? Had he tried to remove someone who could explain the real numbers? Or was it just careless timing, him firing me right before the truth cracked open? The more I thought about it, the less random it seemed. I closed my eyes again, letting the realization wash over me slowly. I wasn't angry anymore, just stunned. If my suspicion was correct, the company was heading straight toward a major crisis. And the only person who could clearly explain what actually happened was me. My phone buzzed one more time. This time, it was a call from Daniel, my closest coworker. His voice shook slightly. Hey, listen. I don't know if you can hear what's happening up there, but the board is furious. They're asking why the projections don't match the real numbers. Ethan's blaming the data team. But they're saying the files came from your department. I frowned. But those weren't the final files. I told them they needed corrections. They never replaced them. That's exactly the problem, he whispered. Someone presented the wrong version. And now nobody can explain why. I felt a hollow ache in my chest. 25 years of dedication, and now my name was being dragged through confusion, maybe even blamed for a mistake I had tried to prevent. Daniel continued, lowering his voice further. There's talk that maybe firing you was part of trying to shift responsibility. I froze. Shift responsibility. The idea landed like a stone inside me. If Ethan had decided to use me as the quiet scapegoat, the one who wouldn't fight back, the one who had always been loyal, then firing me first thing in the morning suddenly made too much sense. I stood up slowly. Daniel, are they asking for me? No, he said. But they're asking who created the numbers. They don't know you're already gone. My heart hammered against my ribs. Investors walking out, the board asking questions, projections collapsing. Everything was spiraling fast. And if they thought I was still part of the team, then the confusion was growing every minute. I looked toward the elevators, watching them open and close, feeling things shift around me in a way I couldn't fully understand yet. Daniel hesitated before speaking again. If someone doesn't explain the truth, Ethan might push the blame toward you, and you won't even be there to defend yourself. A tight, sharp quiet settled around me. I realized something important in that moment, something that made my decision clearer, even though I wasn't ready for the consequences. I wasn't going back to fight for my job. I was going back because the truth was tangled, hidden, and possibly twisted in a way that could ruin my name. And I wasn't going to let 25 years end in silence or confusion. But I also knew stepping back into that building meant walking into a storm Ethan had created. A storm full of panicked decisions, half-truths, and pressure I had been pushed out of hours earlier. And I had no idea what they would say when they saw me walk back in. Would they listen? Would they believe me? Or would Ethan try to shut me down before I even spoke? I walked toward the elevators slowly, feeling the air shift around me as if the building itself knew something big was about to unfold. The doors slid open with a soft chime, inviting me in. I stepped forward, unaware that the moment I reached the boardroom, nothing in my life, or the company's future, would ever be the same again. And I had no idea that someone inside that room was already waiting for me. The elevator door slid shut, sealing me inside with nothing but my thoughts and the faint hum of the machinery. As the numbers climbed, my pulse climbed with them. I wasn't sure what I was stepping into, but something inside me knew this wasn't just about a wrong projection or a careless firing. This was bigger, messier, like a thread that, once pulled, would unravel things people didn't want exposed. When the elevator reached the executive floor, the air felt heavier, the silence tighter. It was the kind of silence that comes right after someone says something they shouldn't, or right before someone loses control. I stepped out slowly, blending into the quiet hallway lined with glass walls and muted lighting. I could see shadows moving behind the boardroom glass, the outline of tense shoulders, raised hands, someone pacing. Before I could get closer, someone called my name softly. I turned to see Ava, one of the senior analysts, standing half-hidden behind a pillar. Her eyes widened with surprise when she realized I had actually come back. "You're here," she whispered. "I needed to understand what's happening," I said quietly. "Is it really as bad as they're saying?" Ava glanced toward the boardroom door, then stepped closer. "Worse," she murmured. "They've been arguing for over an hour. The investors who stayed are demanding explanations. The 12 who walked out, they might not come back." I felt a pressure in my chest. "Because of the projections?" She nodded slowly. "And because Ethan made decisions based on those projections. Big decisions. Ones he didn't clear with anyone." I rubbed my forehead, but I warned them those files weren't final. "That's the problem," Ava said, lowering her voice even more. "There's no record of your warning. Not in the system, not in the email threads. It looks like the corrections were never received." I froze. "I sent them. I followed up. I know," she said quickly. "You've worked here longer than I've been alive. But someone tampered with something. Or deleted something. Or hid something." Her words landed like stones. Tampered. Deleted. Hidden. This wasn't just carelessness. Someone was covering something up. Ava stepped back when footsteps approached. One of the junior assistants hurried past us, clutching a folder like it was about to explode. I didn't recognize the panicked look on her face. I'd seen stress, but this seemed deeper, like she had overheard something she shouldn't have. As she disappeared around the corner, Ava leaned closer again. "There's more." My stomach tightened. "More. There was always more." "Right before the investors stormed out," she whispered, "an email surfaced. An anonymous one. It claimed that someone intentionally pushed incomplete projections forward, and your name was on the file." I went completely still. Anonymous email. My name. Intentional. "I never—" "We know," she said quickly, almost pleading. "Most of us know you wouldn't do something like that. But the timing, the firing, the email, it looks bad." My hands clenched at my sides. "So what are they saying in there right now?" "That they need a culprit," Ava whispered, her voice shaking. "Someone to blame before things get worse." A cold chill ran down my spine. A scapegoat. Ethan's escape route. And I had walked right back into the middle of it. Before I could say anything more, the boardroom door cracked open. 2 executives stepped out, both looking tense and tired. They barely glanced at me. One muttered something about calling legal. The other sighed, rubbing his temples, as if everything was falling apart faster than he could process. Ava grabbed my arm lightly. "You should be careful," she whispered. "If Ethan sees you here, he might twist this even more." I swallowed hard, unsure whether to walk into the boardroom or disappear before things got worse. But before I could decide, another voice echoed down the hallway. "Why is he here?" "Ethan." He stood near the boardroom door, his posture stiff, his expression tight. His face was slightly pale, probably from the pressure inside, but his tone was sharp, sharper than it had been when he fired me. I turned slowly. I needed clarity. "You don't work here anymore," he said coldly. "You can't just walk onto the executive floor." Ava straightened, about to defend me, but I gave her a small shake of my head. I didn't want her pulled into this. "I heard the projections were questioned," I said calmly. "That's none of your concern," he said quickly, too quickly. His eyes flicked toward the boardroom door, like he was scared someone inside might hear us. For the first time, I didn't see arrogance in his face. I saw fear. Real fear. The kind of fear that doesn't come from a mistake, but from being caught. "You used the wrong files," I said quietly. His jaw tightened. The files were labeled final. They weren't. Well, that's not what it shows now, he snapped. Your emails are missing, your updates aren't in the system, and now investors think someone sabotaged the forecast. So unless you want things to get worse, I suggest you leave. There it was. The threat, wrapped in corporate words. Leave before things get worse. Before blame lands fully on me. Before he loses control completely. I stepped closer, lowering my voice to match his. You deleted my corrections, didn't you? For a moment, something flickered across his expression, something like guilt, or panic, or both. But he quickly covered it. You're out of line, he whispered harshly. No, I said, keeping my tone steady. I'm the only one who knows exactly what you ignored, and maybe the board needs to hear it. His eyes widened slightly. Fear sharpened into something darker, anger mixed with desperation. You walk in there and say anything, he said quietly, and you'll destroy everything. I studied him. Everything, or just your position. He opened his mouth, but before he could speak, someone inside the boardroom called his name sharply. He flinched. They're asking about you, I said softly. Aren't they? He didn't answer. He didn't have to. The silence said enough. Another person poked their head out of the boardroom, scanning the hall. When they saw me, their brow furrowed in confusion. Is that? I thought he was. Ethan quickly stepped in front of me. He was just leaving, he snapped. But before he could push the door shut, someone inside spoke loudly enough for both of us to hear. If he's here, bring him in. Ethan froze. A heavy, loaded moment filled the hallway. Ava stared. I stared. Even Ethan seemed unsure whether to run or argue. The board wanted to speak to me. Not to accuse. Not to push me away. But because someone inside suspected the truth wasn't what Ethan had presented. The board aide stepped aside, waiting. I glanced at Ethan one last time. His jaw was tight, his breathing uneven. He looked like someone who had built a careful wall and just watched a crack spread across the center. I stepped past him. The boardroom was brighter than I expected. Every face turned toward me, some surprised, some frustrated, some curious. The atmosphere wasn't just tense. It was electric, charged with confusion and accusation and unspoken questions. One of the senior board members motioned to an empty chair. Please sit, he said. We need clarity. And we were told you understand the projections better than anyone. Ethan stood near the door, his jaw tight, his hands curled at his sides. He looked trapped. I slowly lowered myself into the chair, feeling 100 eyes on me. The door closed behind us, and in that moment, the real conflict, far bigger than my firing, far deeper than a missing email, was just beginning to unfold. And none of us knew how far the truth would reach. The room felt too bright, too sharp, like every detail was under a spotlight. I could hear the faint hum of the air conditioner and the soft clicking of a pen somewhere at the far end of the table. The board members watched me with a mixture of curiosity and urgency, as if I had walked in carrying answers no one else could provide. And maybe, in a way, I had. One of the senior board members leaned forward. His tone was calm, but his eyes carried the weight of the chaos happening underneath. We were told you prepared the original projections for Q3, he said. I did, I replied. And yet, another board member added, the file we received doesn't match the corrections your team claims you highlighted. My pulse quickened. This was it, the point where truth and lies met face to face. I took a breath, because the file you received wasn't the final version. The corrections were made, but someone pushed the wrong file forward. A few whispers echoed around the table. Someone scribbled notes. Someone else exchanged a tense glance with their neighbor. Ethan stood near the wall, arms folded tightly, shoulders rigid. His jaw clenched every time I spoke, like each sentence pushed him closer to a cliff. His eyes kept darting between me and the board, restless and uneasy. Do you have proof of these corrections? Another member asked. Proof. The word hit me hard. I had sent the emails. I had made the updates. But now, with files mysteriously missing and emails deleted, My hands felt empty. I had documentation, I said slowly, but it's no longer in the system. A low murmur spread across the boardroom. People exchanged looks that weren't subtle anymore. Confusion, frustration, suspicion. They were all visible on their faces. Are you implying data was removed? Someone asked. I looked at Ethan. His eyes hardened, warning me without words. I'm saying, I replied carefully, that the updates I made didn't disappear on their own. The room went completely silent. One of the investors who had stayed, an older man with sharp eyes, sat forward. Mr. Hale, he said, addressing Ethan, were you aware that the file you presented was not final? Ethan's throat tightened visibly. The file was marked final when it reached me. The investor didn't blink. Who marked it final? Ethan hesitated. Too long. I assumed the department finalized it, he said weakly. You assumed, the investor repeated, not as a question but as a challenge. I could see the shift happening. Bit by bit, the room's focus pivoted. They weren't looking at me anymore, they were looking at him. But Ethan wasn't done fighting. He stepped closer to the table. Let's be realistic here, he said quickly. If this man, he pointed at me, and the bitterness in the words stung, had been more careful, we wouldn't be here. We trusted his experience for years. Maybe the mistake happened earlier than he wants to admit. I sat still, letting him talk, letting his panic reveal itself. His words weren't sharp, they were shaky, rushed, like someone trying to cover cracks with their bare hands. A few board members exchanged skeptical looks. I didn't make the mistake, I said quietly. I warned your team. I followed protocol. And I was fired before I could verify the final version. That last sentence hit the room like a sudden gust of wind. One board member raised his brows. You were fired this morning? Yes, I answered. The investor side. On his 25th anniversary, apparently. More whispers. More shifting in chairs. Even those who had remained neutral now looked uneasy. The firing hadn't just been inappropriate, it now looked suspicious. One board member, a woman known for her precise judgment, turned toward Ethan. Why did you terminate someone with 25 years of service on the very same morning these discrepancies surfaced? Ethan's face went pale. His lips parted, but nothing came out. The room waited. The silent pressure grew thicker with every passing second. Well, she pressed. I didn't know about the discrepancies then, he stammered. The restructuring. She cut him off. Restructuring requires board approval. We approved no such thing. Ethan's face fell completely. He opened his mouth again, but another voice spoke first. Sir, a soft voice said from the doorway. Everyone turned. It was the junior assistant, the same girl who had run down the hallway earlier, clutching a folder with fear written all over her face. She stepped inside hesitantly. I'm sorry, she said, trembling. I tried to tell someone earlier, but no one would listen. The board members stared, waiting. She held up a printed sheet. I found this in the system logs, timestamps of deleted emails. They were removed from the administrative panel, not from his account. She looked at me briefly, apologetic, then turned to the board. These deletions happened late last night, she continued, her voice faint but steady. And all of them were related to the projection updates. My breath caught. The room fell into stunned silence before erupting into overlapping voices, questions, accusations, whispered disbelief. Ethan took a step back, shoulders tensing, eyes wide. Who accessed the panel? Someone demanded. The assistant swallowed. Her eyes flicked to Ethan. The log shows the access came from the CEO credentials. This time, the silence was explosive. Every head turned toward Ethan. His face drained of color, and for a moment, he actually seemed to forget how to breathe. That's impossible, he whispered. I never. But his voice faded. Even he could hear how unconvincing he sounded. A board member stood up slowly. You deleted the warnings. You pushed the wrong file. You misled the investors. And then you fired the one person who could expose you. The tension in the air grew, so thick it felt like the walls were closing in. Ethan shook his head desperately. This is a setup, he said quickly. Someone's framing me. Maybe him. He pointed at me again, voice cracking. Maybe he did all this and is trying to turn it around. If he wanted to cover his tracks, an investor snapped, why would he walk back into this room voluntarily? That question hit Ethan harder than any accusation so far. He broke eye contact, looking down at the table, his hands trembling slightly. The board members glanced among themselves, silent communication passing between them. Something was shifting, rapidly, dangerously, and I could feel it building toward an explosion. One of them finally spoke. "We need full access to the system logs. Now. And we need legal in the room." Another added, "And all internal decisions made by Ethan Hale in the last 3 months must be reviewed immediately." Ethan's eyes widened. "You can't." "We can," the board member said coldly, "and we will." The assistant stepped back, clutching the folder like it was burning her hands. The boardroom shifted from tense to electric, a storm gathering strength in every direction. Then the investor at the end of the table looked directly at me. "You," he said softly, "may have just prevented a disaster or uncovered one." My chest tightened. I didn't feel like a hero. I didn't even feel safe. If anything, the room felt more dangerous now, like everything was on the brink of collapsing. Another board member leaned forward. "Before we proceed," he said, "we need to hear your full account. Every detail, every message, everything you observed." The lights seemed brighter. The room seemed smaller. The air felt thick with expectation. I nodded slowly, preparing to speak, but inside, my thoughts were racing faster than ever. Because something still didn't make sense. The deleted emails, the rushed firing, the wrong file, the anonymous message, and the investors who walked out before this all exploded. There was a bigger piece missing, something hidden under all the noise. And whatever it was, I could feel it pressing in, pushing the story toward something massive, something that hadn't surfaced yet. The room quieted. Everyone leaned closer. Even Ethan, cornered, desperate, stared at me, waiting. I opened my mouth to speak, and in that exact moment, the boardroom door swung open sharply. Someone unexpected stepped inside, and the real climax began. Everything around them suddenly felt heavier, as if the air itself sensed what was coming. Zara kept staring at the shadows on the far end of the warehouse, trying to make sense of a strange pattern she had noticed earlier. It wasn't just the missing documents or the unanswered calls anymore. Something bigger was unfolding, and every step they took seemed to pull them deeper into a situation none of them had prepared for. She slowly looked at Horace, who was already watching her with the same uneasy curiosity. He sensed it too, the feeling that they were standing on the edge of something much darker. Before they could discuss anything, a faint metallic sound echoed across the room. It wasn't loud, but it was enough to make both of them freeze. Horace moved toward the source, while signaling Zara to stay close. The sound repeated, a slow dragging noise, like something being pulled across the concrete floor. They followed it carefully until they reached the far corner, where the old storage crates were stacked. The dragging stopped just as they reached the last crate, but what caught them off guard was the crate itself slightly trembling, as if something, or someone, had just stepped away from behind it. Horace quickly checked the back area, but it was empty. That made it even more unsettling. Zara held her breath as she studied the ground and noticed fresh footprints, too recent to ignore. Whoever had been there was watching them, listening to them, maybe even waiting for the right moment. It added a new layer to the conflict they were already drowning in. The mystery wasn't just about secrets anymore. It was about presence, about someone actively trying to stay hidden while staying close. When they stepped outside, they found Ryan pacing near the car, frustration written all over him. He didn't even wait for them to speak. He just blurted out that he had found something disturbing, an email thread between the missing staff member and an unknown address. The messages hinted at someone being threatened, warned not to reveal certain details. The timing matched everything they had experienced so far. But before they could process it, Ryan revealed another detail. The unknown sender had attached coordinates, and those coordinates pointed directly to the abandoned factory they had just come from. That revelation shifted the entire energy around them. It meant the person they were trying to understand wasn't just running or hiding. They might have been trying to guide them, warn them, or even set up a meeting that never happened. But if that was true, then who was the person inside the warehouse just minutes ago? And why were they trying so hard to remain unseen? As they stood outside discussing this new twist, Zara's phone buzzed again. Another anonymous message. This time, only 2 words appeared. Not alone. Her hands trembled slightly, but she didn't look away from the screen. The timing was too perfect, too targeted. Someone knew exactly where they were and what they were doing. It made her wonder if the entire situation was being controlled from a distance, with every move they made being observed. Horace suggested they move to a safer place and regroup, but before they could leave, a car parked across the street flashed its headlights twice. It wasn't a random vehicle. It was the same one they had seen earlier in the day near the office building. The windows were tinted too dark to see through, but the message was clear. Someone was following them deliberately. The tension rose instantly. They didn't know if the driver was a threat, an ally, or someone trapped in the same situation. The uncertainty made it worse. They decided not to drive away immediately, fearing it might escalate things. Instead, they moved slowly around the corner, watching the car from a hidden angle. To their surprise, the vehicle didn't move closer. It just stayed there, engine running, like someone waiting for a signal. And then, almost on cue, another message arrived on Zara's phone. You're getting close. This second twist hit them harder than the first. Until now, they thought they were discovering things step by step. But this message suggested something else. Someone wanted them to find the truth, but only the version that person allowed. It raised a dangerous possibility. The entire conflict might have another layer they hadn't even touched yet. Ryan quickly opened the email thread again, analyzing the timestamps. He noticed something none of them had caught earlier. One of the emails had been sent from the same network they had used the night before, which meant the unknown sender had been near them recently, maybe even in the same place. The conflict suddenly felt bigger and smarter than they had assumed. As they continued talking, the car across the street slowly rolled forward, then turned away without speeding up or slowing down. It was as if the driver wanted to make sure they saw the exit, leaving them confused but alert. Zara felt her heart pounding, not from fear but from the growing realization that the stakes had just been raised. If someone was guiding them, then someone else might be trying to stop them or control them from both sides. The closer they got to understanding the mystery, the more dangerous it seemed. They weren't chasing one truth, they were caught between multiple truths, each hiding another secret behind it. And with every new clue, the line between ally and enemy blurred even more. Everything they had witnessed, the footprints, the emails, the silent watcher, the messages, felt like pieces of a puzzle someone else had arranged long before they arrived. They just didn't know whether the final picture was going to lead them to answers or something far more troubling. And with the night growing darker around them, the feeling that someone was pulling strings from the shadows grew stronger, leaving them with only one option: to keep going deeper, knowing the next step might be the one that finally forces the real threat to show itself. The night deepened as they followed the last set of coordinates Ryan had decrypted. The city lights faded behind them until all that remained was the distant hum of traffic and the soft crunch of gravel under their shoes. Zara felt an uneasy calm settle over her, the kind that comes right before something huge breaks open. Horace walked a little ahead, scanning every direction, while Ryan kept checking the signal strength on his device. Everything pointed toward the old service tunnel just a few meters away. A faint light flickered inside the tunnel, and for the first time, they realized this wasn't something they had stumbled into. Someone had led them here with precision. As they stepped inside, the echo of dripping water surrounded them, and the air turned cooler. The tension built with every step they took, knowing they were walking into the heart of the conflict they'd been chasing for days. At the end of the tunnel, a single figure stood waiting. The dim light made it hard to recognize the person, but as they moved closer, the familiar outline became clear. It was the missing staff member, Adil. He looked exhausted, as if he hadn't slept in days, but his eyes were sharp and alert. The moment he saw them, relief washed over his face. Before any of them could speak, Adil raised his hands. He wasn't trying to surrender, he was trying to warn them. "You shouldn't have come alone," he whispered. His voice trembled, not from fear, but from urgency. Horace stepped forward and asked the question they all needed answered. Why had Adil vanished, and why had someone been watching them? Adil took a shaky breath and explained everything. He had uncovered a major internal fraud scheme linked to a group that used employees as scapegoats whenever something went wrong. When he refused to stay silent, he began receiving threats. The anonymous messages that Zara had been getting weren't from the enemy, They were from him. He had been trying to guide them without revealing his exact location, afraid the real target would follow the clues too. But the story wasn't as simple as one group targeting a whistleblower. Adil revealed that someone in their own office had been feeding information to the people behind the fraud. Someone who stayed close to them, watched their movements, and pretended to help. Zara's pulse spiked as she remembered the car, the messages, the strange timing of clues. Everything pointed toward a traitor they hadn't noticed. Before they could ask who it was, a sudden metallic clang echoed behind them. A silhouette appeared at the tunnel entrance. For a moment, none of them moved. Then the figure stepped into the light, and their shock froze them in place. It was Ryan. Not the Ryan standing next to Zara, but another figure with the same build, same stance, holding a small device that blinked steadily. The real Ryan turned pale, as if seeing his own reflection. Zara took a step back, confused and terrified. Haris instinctively moved closer to shield them. The second Ryan smirked, and that expression alone shattered any doubt. He wasn't a look-alike. He was the person behind everything, the one who had been using Ryan's identity online to mislead Adil, track their conversations, and plant fake evidence. Adil had never met Ryan in person, which made it easy for the impersonator to manipulate everything. The real Ryan stepped forward and demanded to know who he was. The imposter simply said, "Someone you trusted more than you should have." As he pressed a button on the device, the tunnel lights flickered. A hidden panel on the side wall slid open, revealing boxes of files, equipment, and stolen data. This was the core of the operation Adil had been trying to expose. Everything was right here, proof that could end the entire criminal network. But the imposter didn't look panicked. He looked satisfied, almost relieved. He said they were never supposed to make it this far. His plan was to frame Adil, bury the evidence, and disappear. But their persistence had forced him to skip steps and show himself sooner than he wanted. Haris stepped forward to stop him, but Adil shouted a warning. The imposter tried to escape, but Ryan tackled him before he could reach the exit. The device clattered across the floor, its light fading. The impact knocked the imposter unconscious, and everything finally fell silent except for their heavy breathing. For a moment, they just stood there, letting the reality settle in. The main conflict had cracked open completely. They had found the truth, uncovered the traitor, and secured all the evidence they needed. Adil finally looked like he could breathe again, the fear slowly leaving his eyes. But just when they thought everything had settled, Zara's phone buzzed. It was another anonymous message. Only this time it said, "You found one, not the other." A chill ran through all of them. The imposter wasn't working alone. Someone else still had access. Someone who knew they were in the tunnel at that very moment. Before Zara could respond, the tunnel lights dimmed again for a split second, just long enough to make their hearts drop. The story wasn't over. The threat wasn't gone. And the final twist made it clear that someone even more powerful had been pulling the strings silently from a distance, waiting for their next move. They had reached the climax, but the shadows still held a secret none of them had seen coming. The message on Zara's screen glowed like a warning neither of them could ignore. For a long moment, none of them spoke. The tunnel felt tighter, colder, as if someone else might be watching from the darkness. Haris immediately grabbed the unconscious imposter's device, hoping to disable whatever system was still active, but Adil stopped him gently and said they needed to leave the tunnel first. Staying there meant staying exposed. So they moved quickly, helping each other through the narrow passage until they finally reached the outside air. The sky had shifted to a deep gray, hinting at rain. Zara breathed in the cool breeze, trying to steady her heartbeat. Ryan stayed quiet for most of the walk back to the car, still shaken by the fact that someone had been using his identity to manipulate everything. When they reached the parking area, he finally spoke. He said the message didn't scare him as much as the idea that someone inside their company still had the power to move things around like chess pieces. Adil nodded, as if he already knew what Ryan was thinking. They didn't go home. Instead, they drove straight to a safe location that Adil trusted, a small rented workspace he used before he disappeared. Inside, everything looked untouched. Stacks of documents, old laptops, and encrypted drives were lined up neatly, showing how long Adil had been trying to expose the fraud. Zara looked around and realized he had been fighting this battle mostly alone. It made her wonder how many signs she might have overlooked back at the office. Adil plugged in one of the drives and began sorting through the files with Ryan. They quickly discovered something that tied everything together. The anonymous messages weren't coming from just one person. They were part of an automated system triggered whenever new files were accessed, whenever a login was attempted in odd hours, or whenever evidence moved from one location to another. The system itself was designed to feel like a human was behind it. That meant the warning, "You found one," not the other, might not have been sent by an actual accomplice. It could have been triggered by the capture of the imposter. The realization eased some of the tension, but not all. Someone still had created the system, and someone still had access to it. Zara asked the question they were all thinking: who would benefit the most from keeping all of this hidden? Adil took a deep breath before answering. He said the corruption wasn't limited to a single person or department. It was tied to a group of investors who had been quietly controlling decisions behind the scenes. They created shell divisions, manipulated financial reports, and used employees as shields whenever investigations came close. But when those 12 investors walked out earlier, frustrated, angry, and suspicious, it had shaken the whole structure. The timing wasn't a coincidence. They knew the truth was slipping out of their hands. The imposter was just a pawn, someone hired to confuse the trail and push blame on others. The real mastermind was an investor who had been silent during every meeting, someone who rarely appeared in person. Adil showed them an encrypted folder with travel records, email threads, and contract details. Everything pointed to him. He had been behind the secret monitoring system, the threats, the manipulation of files, and the attempt to frame multiple employees, including Adil. But there was something the mastermind didn't expect. Adil wasn't alone anymore, and the evidence no longer sat isolated in a hidden tunnel. It was now spread across multiple drives, devices, and secure channels. They spent hours backing up every piece of information. Ryan's technical skills, Zara's detailed notes, Horace's quick judgment, and Adil's insider knowledge all worked together smoothly. It didn't feel like a desperate mission anymore. It felt like closure finally taking shape. As they prepared the final report, rain began hitting the windows softly. It brought a sense of calm after the long storm they had survived. Zara glanced at her phone again. No more anonymous messages. No new warnings. Just silence. And for the first time in days, that silence felt peaceful instead of threatening. The next morning, they walked into the company building together. Everything looked normal. The usual morning chatter, the sound of keyboards, people walking to their desks with coffee. But the atmosphere felt different. Maybe it was because they knew what lay underneath the surface, or maybe because they were finally ready to end the long cycle of secrets. They met with the board members, including the remaining investors who hadn't walked out. At first, they tried to control the conversation, insisting the previous incidents were misunderstandings. But when Adil placed the evidence on the table, the mood shifted instantly. One by one, Ryan explained how data had been manipulated. Zara described the suspicious messages and the attempts to lure them off course. Horace pointed out the system inconsistencies that matched the mastermind's involvement. And Adil, with a steady voice, revealed the truth about the fraud network. The room went silent. Not defensive silence, shocked silence. They realized the extent of damage that had been happening behind their backs. Within minutes, orders were issued for a full internal investigation. Access privileges were revoked. Security protocols were tightened. And the mastermind investor, who had skipped the meeting entirely, was immediately reported to authorities. As they walked out of the boardroom, Zara felt something lift off her chest. They had spent so long running, doubting, and fearing. Now, there was nothing left to hide, nothing left chasing them. Adil finally smiled, a real, relieved smile, and thanked them. He said he never expected anyone to stand by him when things got dangerous. Zara told him he didn't deserve to fight alone. Ryan added that truth had a strange way of revealing itself, no matter how complicated the path. And Horace simply said that sometimes doing the right thing is messy, but still worth it. In the following days, the company slowly stabilized. Employees who had felt ignored were finally heard. Systems were cleaned and rebuilt. Trust, though shaken, began to grow again. And the tension that had hovered quietly over everyone faded. For Zara, The entire experience became a reminder that even in the middle of chaos, people could still choose to step up for one another. For Ryan, it became a lesson on how identity and trust can be twisted, yet still reclaimed. For Horace, it showed how leadership sometimes starts in moments no one sees. And for Adil, it gave him his life back. The last loose thread, the second anonymous message, never appeared again. Maybe it was just an automated echo, or maybe it was a sign that someone else out there still watched quietly. But they didn't let that thought control them anymore. They had done their part. They had ended the story the right way. On the final evening, they stood together outside the office as the sun dipped low. The sky turned gold, reflecting the feelings settling inside them, calm, warm, and honest. The conflict was over. The truth had won. And their lives, once tangled in secrets and fear, now had room to breathe again. Everything had come full circle. And with that, their story finally found its natural ending.